Please allow me to preface this video by saying I am not and have never been suicidal. Okay. So I have been looking at some numbers recently and doing a little bit of analysis on the nature of the world, and I have come to some scary realizations about reality. Please forgive me. As soon as I said that, it seems the powers that be have cut my Wi-Fi. I'm going off script. I was watching some videos of Jordan Heitema and looking a little bit into the Alfonso Davis and J. Rodriguez differentiations and discrepancies as to how much they each individually earn with their salaries. And the revelations were pretty alarming. So Alfonso Davies makes around, who's a football player or soccer player for Bayern Munich, is reportedly making around 288,000 euros a year. Jay Rodriguez, who is essentially the best up-and-coming baseball player in the world, makes $100,000 more roughly at $388,000 per year. And Jordan Heitema, who's been romantically involved with both men, I did not manage to possess a figure for how much she makes per year, but I can say that it's probably she makes probably less than the amount each one of them makes per week in a year. So this made me start to think about, because she's probably the same proficiency in the sport as them, just born to a different gender, so thus a different market. But this made me start to think about society, inequality, equality, money as a mechanism of the illusion of control and power, and what is kind of hiding underneath all this stuff. So I looked into it, and the results were pretty horrifying. Basically, 40% of the world as we know it is in this category called labor, where you have registered nurses who can make around $1,500 US a week to senior partners at law firms making around $60,000 a week. And that is a large discrepancy until you start to kind of look at the fringes of the real kind of where the real stuff is, because it's not in the middle. Actually, the registered nurse and the senior kind of equity lawyer, when you start to look at it through the perspective of the people on these fringes and what's really going on here, are really much more alike than the constituents in these different class demographics. So what do I mean by different class demographics? I'm talking about institutionalized slavery. I'm talking about the great composers of history, the great thinkers of history. I'm talking about professional athletes, artists, news kind of manufacturers, writers, moguls, literary kind of thinkers, and monks, spiritual figures, people who are being the victim to sex trafficking and illiteracy and sweatshops, cultural inefficiencies. So I looked at these coalition coefficients of all these demographics, and it really kind of shocked the shit out of me, because at the top you had, in terms of this type of capitalistic monetizable, look at it, you had the Elon Musks of the world and you had the Zuckerbergs making roughly around $1.5 billion a week. And at the bottom of this type of capitalist market, you have people in sweatshops making around $35 a week, or the homeless who make around an average of $35 a week. By that kind of mechanism, the homeless are richer than me, or unemployment benefits, which are around these numbers, $50 to $100 a week. And the point of the matter is, when you look at it from the difference of 100 to 1.5 billion a week versus 100,000, that's $40,000 more than any equity lawyer in the world. That's incredibly high number, $100,000 a week. Or even, let's talk the best of the best, a sports athlete at making $200,000 a week. The number compared to kind of that higher echelon in the capitalistic structure with the Larry Ellisons and this billionaire class is actually kind of disgusting, because it can take literally a Stephen Curry or literally some of the greatest people in their competitive domains who are responsible for doing things that no one can do, and it just puts them in the same gambit as you and I and sweatshop workers and people. It was absurd to me. So I started to have a thought about what actually is, how do we differentiate the wealth, because the wealth is clearly obfuscating what's really going on here, which is kind of power dynamics, demarcating what actually matters. And above the billionaires, when I was speaking with kind of AI modeling and other things on the web, there are two classes traditionally ranked above billionaires for power, which is, the first class is dictators, tyrants, and political officials. And the second is kind of like people who control the news and are in charge of the law, and judges, Supreme Court justices, but I guess you could say it's equalized through them acting in a collective capacity as opposed to the power of these moguls. But obviously on top of them, if you're going to the crown princes and the kings and dictators of society, there is no comparison there in terms of raw power. I guess you could limit them by their respective populace that they govern over and their geographic capacity. But it's interesting to look at this because when you start to get up there, it's fascinating. Another interesting thing was looking at Cardi B, who makes, I think, about something absurd, some absurd number of money a week that is just towering over any type of great profession, law, financial analyst, even hedge fund managers. Something was weird when I started seeing that Cardi B was just destroying like hedge fund managers in terms of how, or incredible senior lawyers in terms of how much she was making. Cardi B and Nicki Minaj do not run the world, right? So I had to start to get into the really interesting territory where I started to look at these people with, number one, time, wealth in time, number two, wealth in ideas and social impact, and number three, those who are kind of indebted. And you reach an intersection with the indebtedness because $370 trillion of the world's money is indebted. I'm thinking, to who? Obviously, you've got these Blackstone, BlackRock, huge conglomerates, which are probably responsible for being the most consequential domineering forces in terms of influence in society. But in terms of not physical, corporal influence on the world, but the intangible in the minds, it's obviously going to people like Rumi, right? And Mozart and the Beethovens. But the interesting thing about these guys is they made no money and they died broke or in debt. But the amount of money that has been generated from the sales of their writings, like Rumi, who's most popular poet or writer, I believe, in America for his domain, or Mozart and the composers, is almost insurmountable or unable to be counted or even contemplated. Money stops having any real tangible meaning there. And I think that's a profuse, great irony that they died broke, yet amassed a wealth in society that's not even quantifiable. Their songs, Beethoven's Seventh is not able to be monetized, period. It's not Billy Joel, okay? Next is the correlation between, obviously, monks, who actually, when I was looking into research, seem to be the most powerful people on earth for some reason, because they have domain over not just, I guess, themselves, time, but also the spiritual realm. Tibetan monks were seen as some of the most influential and powerful people in the world today, greatly surmounting the billionaires in society. But the notion of time became incredibly significant, and people like me actually were fulfilling these domains of being weirdly in the 0.0001% of one thing, but also the 0.001% of the other. So you'd have 40% of the world in this labor domain, and then you'd have these 0.001s on each side, and they'd be stuff like time, right? Wealth and time, which I have because I have literally probably hopefully, they don't get me, 70 years after this, just I can do literally whatever I want and not go into work, right? So I'm in the 0.001% of people in the world in terms of time, but I'm in the highest there, probably in history, but I'm the lowest of 0.0001% in terms of income or earning potential. I make no money at all, $0 a week. So that was an interesting coefficient or disproportionate incommensurable like percentage or percentile for me. It's the same as this notion of Mozart and the amount of wealth he generated, and probably the same for countries. If you look at the United States being the highest GDP in the world while owing the most in terms of having over $20 trillion worth of debt. So there are these gross gross inconsistencies where the top is the lowest, and actually it's kind of in the, so that you have a lot of the top is, people have the top one, and then you got top 0.1, and then lowest 0.1. But the people in the middle is what I realize are actually like the thing that holds it all together. They are the glue. And even Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg were kind of in the middle of the, because of the late, if you're talking about it through all time, they're just the top of it. So what I'm trying to say here is, I was sold a lie, and I think we all were sold a lie. I don't want to cause a stir here or anything, but we were sold a lie. The most important thing that I saw or thought of was the thing that was priceless or timeless for these guys wasn't an abundance of meaning or purpose in the world, or the ability to amass great wealth or power or domineer over people or compare themselves to the lower status quo. The most important thing, it seemed for Rumi, was simply the only thing that seemed truly priceless and timeless and the meaning of everything for him was simply having a space and time in a room to be able to think alone.